Welcome to the Women Who Change the World podcast, the place where everyday women world changers share their stories to inspire, challenge, and equip you to change your world. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Women Who Change the World. I'm your host, Samantha Hatcher, and I am here with my friend Laura Sharp-Waits, and we are going to talk about trapped emotions and how letting them go. No, I'm not going to sing that for you. Will make your life a better place. A better place. I like that. Your life a better place. How are you, Laura?
I am well today. Thank you.
Good, good. I am excited to share your story with my listeners and get into talking a little bit about the work that you've helped me do. It's really exciting because it's not something I ever expected. And as my husband says, it's a little bit of voodoo. And
I
he
get that
doesn't
a lot.
understand it. But he's seen the changes, and it's not his mother had some thing that she used to do for her allergies, and he's like, "It's voodoo, Mom. It's voodoo, but it works." So tell us a little bit about your story from the hard place in your life that you had to come out of to get to where you are today.
Oh man, that is a really tough place. Um, in I was married to Todd in 2016 in November, and then that next July 2017, I was diagnosed with breast cancer, a very aggressive breast cancer, and it really kind of threw us both for a loop. Just getting it and going through all the details of it. I had about 9 procedures and surgeries, um, chemo out the gazoo, and I mean every time I turned around, it was one of those things where I learned all about spiritual warfare because I'd take a step forward and the enemy didn't want me to move into ministry. And so he'd push me back 3, 4, 5 steps. I mean, I ended up with infections that weren't supposed to be in the body and definitely not in the body where they were. And so it made for a really long cancer battle. But I am cancer free. Woohoo! And so at the end, we were reviewing everything, and they realized that I still had one thing to deal with. And so that was a precancerous cyst on my ovaries that needed to come off. And so I was cool with that. It's another surgery. I'm getting pretty good on this. I've got frequent flyer miles at the hospital. I like all the nurses. And I get there, and here comes a new person I've never seen in all of the surgeries. And she hands me a clipboard and a pen and says, "Sign here." Well, I'm not the typical person. I actually read the crap people hand me. So I did. And as I'm reading it, it says, "You, by signing this form, you acknowledge you will no longer be able to biologically have a child." And it was like, whoa. I guess I knew it, but my body was protecting me.
Mm-hmm.
So I signed it. And I mean, most people are like, "Oh, well, that's no big deal." Well, Todd and I were trying to have a baby. And so it was a very big deal. That meant I could no longer be the mom.
Mm-hmm.
So it became really tough. I went ahead and did it because I knew it was better to get that big glob of cancer. When the cancer's bigger than your ovaries,
Yeah.
it needs to come out. So it did. And I really struggled with that. I was depressed. Um, in not a typical way. I was depressed anytime anybody had a baby, and we had several folks who got married around when we did, several of Todd's cousins, and they were having babies and showers. It was like, ugh. And I couldn't go. I'd get a gift and a card, and I'd drop it off ahead of time with the family member so I didn't have to see the mommy. Um, and it was a really tough time. And Todd's like, "Well, what are you going to do?" And I'm like, "I don't know. I know it's not right." And he's like, "Well, are you going to take, medication, go see a doctor?" I'm like, "I think I've seen enough doctors right now." So he said, "Okay." And of course, friends and family all tried to say the quote unquote right thing.
Right.
"Well, you can still adopt." well, that's true, but that negated my grief. And so that's kind of where I was. My grief was negated, and I wasn't whole. I was whole because they had, done all the reconstruction, but I wasn't whole in my soul. And
Right.
so a friend of mine said, I think you're really grieving, and I think you need to go take this grief and loss program. I said, okay. I was a special ed teacher. I had then moved into college. I had taught for 12 years and
Mm-hmm.
at the college level. And so, I mean, I have degrees. I know what I need to do, but this is
Right.
one of those things where I didn't want to, but I did. And I am so glad and grateful to that friend because that actually helped me see that people often don't say the right things. And when they don't, they add really
Yeah.
horrible stress on you and grief and make you second think, redoubt. It's just a cycle, and it's not cool. So I learned how to do that, and then I thought, ooh, how many of my special need parents are grieving because their children are not meeting all of the milestones?
Yes.
And depending on what disability they have, it could be, oh my gosh, I may die before, I mean, they may die before me, or um, people getting divorces over disabilities
Yes.
because they're blaming each other, they get burned out. And I thought, wow, maybe I ought to get certified so I can help parents.
Mhm.
So I did. I very quickly got signed up and went and I am a advanced certified grief specialist with the Grief Recovery Institute and love it. And it has its place, but you have to do the work. It's not easy. It's a 8-week program. And but it gave me the tools that I could go through a whole bunch of different
Mhm.
relationships that I had been grieving. So my backpack was really full, and so it was interesting. But yeah, so that was a really dark time. When you're especially when you're already quarantined for chemo
Mhm.
and you can't see anybody, and then you go through this surgery and you're kind of glad you're not seeing anybody
Yeah.
because getting up's just not in you get up enough to go to the bathroom, take the dog out, get something to drink, go back to bed.
Yes.
So but after that program I had um, like a whole new perspective on life, and I realized that people don't say the right things, they don't know that they're not saying the right
Mhm.
things. And so my tip for the day is, if you don't know what to say, don't say anything, just give the person a hug, or now that we're in COVID, give them like a fist bump, because silence is better.
Mhm.
But what they would do is they would try and make it about them instead of my grief. It became, oh, my aunt died, or my rabbit died, or it was like,
Mhm.
really, gotcha, okay. So
That's
yeah,
grief is always a hard thing, like you said, because people have no idea what to say. And I remember when my grandma died in 2015, it was the same thing over and over and over. I'm so sorry for your loss. I'm so sorry for your loss. And a friend of mine, um, who I'd known for a really long time, she said that, and as she was giving me a hug, and I said, "Can I say something very blunt?" She said, "Yes, I really don't care if anybody is sorry for my loss." And she's like, "I know what you mean. I know what you mean." And it really helped to have that release to somebody, um, because I've been through the same thing with her losses in her family. And I just sit there next to her. There are some really great lessons in Job about dealing with grief and just being quiet.
yeah. But Job also brings up a whole different point of view depending on what your denomination you are from.
Hmm.
Um, because there some denominations believe that God punishes you, and so they quickly point to Job and say, well, what did you do that God gave you cancer? And it's like, whoa, no, God doesn't give it, he allows it, and he allows it, and you are able usually to do something with it and share what you learned during that situation. so the Job thing, I struggled a lot with.
It is it's there's a lot of lessons and it's very, very deep.
Hmm.
And it's funny how I lost a lot of family members at the beginning of my marriage, and then it kept trickling through, and I would lose more, and I would lose more, and I would lose more. And my husband had nobody passing away. It wasn't until 2013, and we got married in 1995. So we're almost 20 years into this, and he's not had a single family member pass away. And he didn't understand how to deal with it. He didn't understand how to deal with my grief of losing somebody so foundational. I mean, a lot of people are really, really close to their parents. I was really, really close to my grandma. And I lost my grandpa 2 years. No, I lost grandma in 2015. I lost grandpa in 2013. So 2 years apart of bam, bam, the two most foundational people in my life. He didn't know how to deal with it. And he was like, you have a life to live and you have children to take care of and you have things you have to do. And I'm over here going, I just want to get a drink of water, go back to a dark, quiet room, and stay there until I die. And he didn't understand it. He was angry. And so when his time came in 2018 and 2019, it was different because I had already walked the path. I was able to give space, give space for his grieving. And in that, I just didn't say a lot. Just didn't say a lot. You just give space. So, besides the grief certification, I want to talk about my favorite thing. I want
Oh,
to talk
sure.
about this emotion code certification. So, how did your grief certification lead you to the emotion code certification?
Well, the grief certification actually led me to doing a second master's, and I'm doing a master's in divinity for pastoral counseling. And I have been blessed all through this program to take on various programs like premarital counseling, marital counseling, blended family counseling. And so when I got into the class I'm in now, I was so stoked when there was another certification to do. And so I went and looked it up. I was like, oh. And I was kind of with your husband. Is this a voodoo thing? But I'm going to a Christian university, so it can't be a voodoo thing. And so I got right into it and started working on it. And I've got to say, this has by far been the coolest thing in the world. And so it is so cool because not only does it help the individual, it can help if it's an inherited emotion, and I guess we'll talk about those later, but it can help your parents if they're still alive, grandparents if they're still alive, brothers and sisters, and your kids, grandkids, anyone in the lineage, it can help. And to me, that's like making the world a better place. I mean, because happy and positive emotions don't get trapped because they're just
Right.
like free flowing, but negative ones do. And if we have a whole bunch of people walking around with negative stuff, which they do, um, we're gonna, there's no wonder that we've got all kinds of stuff going on in the world, all over the world, because there's so much negative emotion going around.
So, what exactly, you kind of touched on it, but what do you mean by a trapped emotion and how does it get trapped?
So emotions can get trapped in our body. They are typically made in various organs and they may or may not stay there. So for example, it could be like the stomach, the spleen, the gallbladder. Even if you don't still have one, when you did, you could have trapped some emotions. And so they happen. And so for like example, if you get up, you're having a really bad day, you spill coffee on your blouse and the dog poops on the floor and you're car's almost out of gas and you're late to work and everything's already, kind of, it's been a morning and you haven't had coffee and then you go and it's out. Um, and then someone comes in and says something that just cuts you deep. And it's one of your coworkers and you're just not expecting that. your body's pretty resilient. It'll deal with a lot of things. And so it'll say, okay, let's give you a little bit on that one. And so later in the day, it'll come back up, say, hey, we've got some stuff to process. Remember, we had the dog issue and your blouse got ruined, and you're like, yeah, I can deal with that. But I'm not done with my coworker. I can't deal with that right now. That really hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And so they tuck it temporarily. Your body will give you a little bit of time and it'll bring it back up. And if you're still not ready, it finds a place for it. And so you have this negative energy residing somewhere in your body. And so it can cause obviously an imbalance. It can cause other conditions to happen, depending on where they are. I have seen people who um, have had all kinds of digestive issues, and when we release things from that area, they are um, able to go more freely.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry for the overshare, folks. But yeah, so emotions can get trapped in you basically three ways. It can happen inherited, so it comes down through the lineage, meaning somebody somewhere in your ancestors had something happen and it was so bad that they trapped it. And then it's kind of like your DNA, the color of your eyes and your hair and all that good stuff. Well, emotions go with it. It can be absorbed, which means it can be if you're around someone who's toxic or I call them like vampire people because they suck the life out of you. If you're
Mm-hmm.
around someone who is like just negative Nelly person and all they do is be negative, if you're not careful, you could pick up that. And then the other one would be your emotions that you physically trap yourself. So, you can go and have counseling and you can go do all kinds of the self-help books and you can work on yourself and go see coaches, but and you can do a lot of work on yourself. But if you don't know that you have emotions that came down through your ancestry, or you don't know you have emotions from a toxic person in your life, it's hard to work on those that you don't know about. And especially those that, I mean, you may know something that happened 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago, but you may not remember enough about it because your body's not going to let you. And then the worst emotion would be when, and I don't think I know anybody who's not said this. I will never ever let blank hurt me again. Person, situation, it can usually be like during dating or a spouse. If there's a divorce or separation, I hear that a lot, and I will never let them. And I can tell you, when you do that, you're creating a heart wall, which is a number of trapped emotions that kind of knit together and basically make a covering that goes around your heart out of energy that will not allow you to feel those emotions anymore. So people who are going through abuse, oftentimes the women will come in and say, hey, I don't ever want to be hurt by him. It's like, no, no, don't say that, because that's more to work on. But your body's smart, it knows what to do, it's protecting you.
So you kind of mentioned how the trapped emotions affect the organs of the body.
Hmm.
Can you go into a little more detail about how that happens? Because it seems, I mean, this to me is where the voodoo kind of lives of the whole thing of that, and then there's another part that we'll talk about in a minute. But it's like, how do you know that this affects that emotion? Those specific emotions can affect these organs because it's kind of divided up.
It is. So in the emotion code, Dr. Nelson, who is a Christian chiropractor, had put together a list of 60 emotions. And to be honest, there are way more emotions than 60. But it's really hard if you had to go through each individual one to see if that's the specific one. So he went with 60 based on what he felt God leading him to do. And it's split into 2 columns and 6 rows. And so the way they're divided up would be, for example, like abandonment usually comes from the heart or the small
Mhm.
intestine, or anxiety from the spleen or the stomach. And just, even you can think about that. If you're abandoned, your heart's going to hurt. If you have anxiety, you usually feel it in the pit of your stomach.
Yep.
So these things just kind of, they correlate. So what we do is we're able to ask your subconscious. which is how we do this. And we can do this in person on the phone. We can do it on Zoom, or we can even have someone who's really busy today but wants us to do it for them and then send them notes afterwards. So that can work too. But what we do is we go through and we ask the subconscious. And the reason we do that is because our conscious really struggles. The conscious reminds me of like the saying squirrel, right?
Mhm.
So the next thing that happens is the squirrel, but our
Squirrel.
subconscious is like Google. I mean, we can ask it to do anything. It'll tell us what we had for dinner, 2 weeks ago. It'll remember all these other things. And so we can tap in and ask which of the emotions are there. Now, again, I said there are more than 60 that we feel, but your subconscious can say, okay, that abandonment is that's really close to what you're feeling, or it's the same one. And
Mhm.
so we're able to release that and kind of open things up. Now, the cool thing about doing muscle testing through your subconscious is we can get extra information about it. So we can find out if who it was inherited from, your mom's side, your dad's side. This is especially important for parents who have adoptive children, who have foster children, because they may not know why a child is, maybe going through a lot of anxiety or is heartbroken. They may not know. And most little kids are not going to have a lot of emotions in there. So theirs are going to typically be inherited or absorbed from the parents. But so we go through and we ask which these are, and then we can ask the date, and it'll tell us roughly, give or take a year, the age you were when it happened. We can find out, like I said, if it was mom and dad's line, if it came from their mom and dad, how many generations it goes back. Sometimes it's 5 generations, and
Mhm.
sometimes it's 50 generations. So that's a really long time. It can also tell you, you can ask any kind of yes or no questions. So, who did I absorb it from? Was it family, friends, boss, that kind of thing. So you can kind of narrow down the situation. And what I love about it is you don't have to say, if you've been someone who's been abused, first of all, we're going to make sure it's safe for you to release those emotions,
Mhm.
because if you've got that wall up, it's for a reason. And if you need to get away from that abusive person, then your body is going to be smart. It's going to say, no, yes, I have emotions to deal with, but not right this second. And so then, we table it until the abused person is in a safe place, has moved out, and the kids are safe.
Mhm.
And then we can work on it when the body says it's fine. But it's really neat to see how people respond. Sometimes it's immediate. They know exactly when it was, because typically it's the first thing that pops into your head. But if you had a lot going on, it may not be. So that's why we can kind of pinpoint it down. But it's also neat to see how people feel when they do the releases. And I happen to be blessed with being an empath, meaning I can feel different emotions. So I've had people who have had abuse in their life, and when we talk about it, I can tell if they've been stifled or held back, or I can feel if their throat was like you're trying to scream and you're just so scared you can't.
Mhm.
I've had things when, especially in the stomach area, where things I suddenly feel nauseous, and the person will be like, "Me too, me too," um, and it's kind of creepy, but it's also neat because I know they're not going to feel that anymore,
Mhm. So, why does your body trap these emotions?
because we choose not to work on them. Like after the long day with the coffee and all this other stuff, we didn't want to work on it yet, and then we forget about them and they stay there, and then something else happens. And maybe, if you're going through like a divorce or something, you may have like 5 to 10 emotions around that whole thing. You may be angry, you may feel betrayed if the person cheated, and so we may see like a series of 5 to 10 emotions, same period, same incident, all together. So, you if their emotions are coming in that wave, you're not going to have time to process them and get rid of them. You're just going to like, oh, we'll deal with that later, and tuck them. And then 5 years later, you're like, why do I feel so bad?
And it's emotions that are holding you back in
Yes.
life in many ways.
Yes.
Um,
I
I
have
can
seen
I can
this with like,
disclose.
Go ahead.
I can disclose this because it's mine. But you and I did a session the other day where we uncovered 8 emotions that have to do with one incident in my life. That it wasn't just a one time period, but it was focusing in on this certain age. And it got to the point where we're like, yeah, we know what this is about. We know who this is about. We know what all this is all about. And the majority of it was in my liver and my spleen. And I've had my gallbladder removed. So since I've had that done, I've had some liver problems. But y'all, I live in southern Indiana and down near Louisville, Kentucky, and it is allergy season. You should know this if you live here. Everything is covered in pollen. But since that session, I haven't needed my allergy medicine. And you're thinking, what does that have to do with it? Well, your liver is what detoxes your body. And if my liver isn't so busy detoxing emotions, it's free to detox the pollen that comes in. And this is bad. Farmers are turning over their plots. They are putting down pesticides. People are cutting grass. And I'm just okay. And it's very strange to be okay because I grew up here. I know what this is like. If you live here, if you live in the metro Louisville area, you know what I'm talking about. It is horrible. The doctors call it the yuck, the Southern Indiana yuck. But to have that, your liver cleansed in that way of all those emotions that I didn't realize were trapped there, that's huge.
So as we go into a session, I usually ask if there is something you want to work on. So some people come to me from other coaches and they've gotten as far as they could get them, and they're just really concerned that there's like a mindset issue. For some, it's not feeling that they are capable, it's that they're going to be a failure. In some cases, it's maybe a money mindset, and not feeling comfortable saying, I am worth X amount of dollars. And so that is a real cool thing. But you can also come to me and say, hey, I really did want to work on, an ex person in my life. Or they can come and say, the subconscious is really smart. Let's rattle the backpack and see what comes up first, because your body knows what you need to release and what you're ready to release and when to send it. So pretty much every session starts off with a few general ones because I want to get those out of the way, because I want to be able to get to the heart of that mindset or block or goal issue. And if we don't, then we may be missing some aspects that touch on all areas of your life.
It's it's funny how in my sessions will I want to focus on why I'm a nail biter. I want to focus on why I'm a nail biter. But then there's all these other things going on, and all of a sudden we realize that it's part of it. It's part of it. But my big question here is how is it that you can face all of these emotions with me and not have it affect you?
So, being an empath is a challenge. And so, I mean, that can be like, if anybody knows me and I have their number, or we're connected on Voxer or on Facebook, you are most likely at some point during our friendship going to get a text from me or a message that says, you're on my mind and I don't know what's going on, but here's a hug. And, if you want to talk, let me know. Pretty much all of those messages get replied back to, how did you know? Can't explain that. The cool thing is, I guess, is every day I kind of, as I'm getting dressed, I think about like God's armor. And so I especially love his shield because I think that protects my heart. And so I pretend, I guess, like a little child with like I'm spraying on a super shield, and everything bounces off of it. I can feel them, but the impact of them stays on the other side of the shield. Other than I may feel a twinge while we're releasing them, but then they're gone once we do release them. And it would be hard, but there are days that I go to bed and I feel a little tired, and so I'll pray, hey, um, God, please cover me with the blood of Jesus and just remove any emotions that are still sticking to me, because they're not mine and they should not be affecting my body. And I'll go to bed and I'll wake up the next morning bouncing out of bed, feeling completely free and very excited to see, who I can help, because I know every emotion that gets released, that person's going to feel more balanced and they're going to potentially be more positive and just feel happier. But that's also taking more negativity out of our world. And specifically households. So I mean, if you've got negative people, if you're in a relationship and you remove a few emotions, it's going to impact the relationship, usually in a positive way. And the other person's not necessarily going to understand why. If you were removing inherited ones, your kids, it could be removed from your kids, and you may notice changes in them, and they're kind of, they may notice, but they won't think much about it. But you will be watching and be like, yay, they're acting better. So, I mean, while I can't like take on the whole world, I can do, one person, one family at a time.
And don't dismiss how that one person or one family affects the world. It's a huge ripple effect, because the lighter you are, the more room you have to help others.
Mm-hmm. And it also opens you up to your gifts and talents that God has given you. You may never have looked at them because you had so much heaviness. People tell me oftentimes before that they feel really heavy, or they may have a tightness in their lower back or their neck and shoulders. And it's just amazing to me that they'll feel so much better just after releasing one or two, but it can really impact how they feel and can make them a different person who then, goes out and does great things in the world, positive, great things. And so it's beneficial.
Have you ever had a reaction, like a physical reaction, while helping someone? And what was the worst one you've ever had?
Actually, the worst one I think I've had so far has been with you. And it was nausea. Um, and I honestly can't remember what it was specifically, but it was a stomach um, issue. And I'm looking to see. It may have been lack of control. And I just remember I suddenly went from being okay to, oh my gosh, I could seriously go throw up right now. And of course, you were eating pretzels. And I'm like, dude, I need some pretzels because I feel sick to my stomach. Um, and it was a really powerful session for you, because I remember I felt my throat being constricted at one point. I felt nauseous. And then after we did one that was a generational one, I felt dizzy. And the cool thing was you did too. So, then it was like, okay, I'm not having my own, weird experiences here. But you may have been the one that nausea was really powerful.
Yeah, I remember that. I was thinking, for me, it was when the hands around the neck, trying to
Yeah.
prevent me from talking.
Yeah, that was a big one. And I mean, it felt like an invisible hand had literally grabbed a hold of my neck, like if you were going to push someone against a wall or
Hmm.
stop them. And the person may have been trying to silence you, and maybe they had their hand over your mouth, but that was not how I felt it. And it was trippy. And so the cool thing is, if people are willing to share, when I say, does this date ring a bell, or does this emotion ring a bell? If you share, if the Holy Spirit guides me to say something to you, like maybe something you needed to know, and I can share that, it may help you heal differently or think about it differently. But in some cases, people, and I understand, they won't at first, they may not say anything, which is okay too. You can just think about it, and then I can test and see if that's it. And if it's not, we'll keep testing until we figure out what it is. Or I have sent people a copy of the emotions released with a question mark by it, because we don't know. But it gives them something to look back on in their notes when it does pop into their brain, which is usually within a week or so. They'll be like, oh, yeah, I remember now.
There was a lot of that. So, how many emotions, like I'm coming to you for a session, how many emotions do I get to release in a session?
The average is 5 to 10, but it can really vary. If I think one of yours was maybe 4 or 5 because they were really emotionally charged, inherited ones. But then I think you had a day where we released 18.
Yeah.
So, and so not to confuse people, we release one emotion at a time. There's not a quick, easy way to do a bunch
Hmm.
that works. So it's one emotion at a time. And so when I tell you they're heavy, I mean it feels like, okay, I'm gonna go old school. Like the Fred Flintstone's house has that big, huge rock on it. I mean, sometimes it just feels like that rock is like on me, like sitting on my head, and I just feel heavy, and the person does too. And so they'll feel like really big ones. Or if it's one that's been there for a lot of years, it may
Hmm.
feel like a grapefruit suddenly coming out of you. I've had people say, "Oh, I felt that. That felt like when was pregnant and the baby moved." It was like, oh, cool. Some people feel burning. Some people feel like a hand reaching inside, pulling like a tennis ball or a grapefruit out of them. And so your body has to kind of move around when we take that energy out. So you may feel some of it.
Which is why you're always like, move your body, get a drink of water.
Yeah, hydration actually help with being able to remove emotions the fastest. So if you can hydrate before and during, sometimes I need to be hydrated, and sometimes we just need to shake it out because you've just moved something and your body's not comfortable, not hurting, but just not,
Hmm.
something's a little off. And so we will wiggle around and shake. Sometimes people get up and walk around. It just depends where they felt it.
It's kind of like you've gone to a massage therapist and they've given you a deep tissue massage and they hand you a bottle of water as you're leaving. Say, drink this in the next hour. You need it.
Hmm.
Um, because your body's doing work that it's not used to doing. And I'm not talking about like going to the gym and lifting a higher weight or doing a different machine.
Hmm.
This is something your body doesn't know what to do with.
Hmm.
Um, how so when we were doing this, and this is very funny because I'm asking questions about things that I already know the answer to, so it makes it easier to know a direction to go. But at the same time, I feel kind of silly asking questions that I already know the answer to.
It's all good.
And yes, this is how I am on just in craziness in my podcast. When we do release an emotion and we're in the process of this certain emotion that we're dealing with, can I ask my subconscious questions?
You can. You would have to be doing muscle testing on you. But since you're not, you would have to either have me ask the question or you think about it and then I ask yes or no. But I mean, we can ask, who is it from? Was there an incident that caused it? Is that what you're thinking?
Yes,
Okay.
that's what I was thinking. One of the things that we had was for inherited emotions for me that had to go back 20 generations. And in the process of asking this question, asking the types of questions that we can ask, we found out that a relative of mine a long time ago had been molested, a child.
Yeah.
And those things, those not the molestation gets passed down, but those pent up emotions
The lack of
got
control,
passed. Yes,
yeah, feeling
helplessness.
unworthy, yeah, hopelessness, feeling like a failure because they couldn't stop it. And, or crying. And, I don't think we've had that one on you yet.
But it's very interesting that
Yeah.
if you stop for a minute and you realize that's what it is, those emotions that are being trapped sound right.
Hmm.
If you've ever been molested as a child, you have a lack of control. You feel unworthy. There's shame, there's helplessness, there's hopelessness. There can be disgust,
Shock.
shock, and bitterness.
Hmm.
And so these emotions that are coming up, you're going, well, yeah, that makes sense. That make I have that, but I didn't realize why I felt that way.
Hmm.
And I think that's something that the emotion code brings to the table is explaining to you why you feel the way you feel and validating the feelings.
Hmm.
So can you speak into the whole validating that person's feelings and you keeping space for them?
So some people do emotion code really fast, and they just do the emotions. They ask bare information, and they move on. But I guess because of the empath, sometimes emotions feel stronger to me, and so I can sense that there's something with it. I may or may not know that that person has been abused, and usually on the first emotion or two, that would be in that, like the failure, hopelessness, shock, all of those. Um, I may anticipate that that's what it is. But usually by the third emotion, the person's like, okay, I got to tell you, I was abused at such and such age, and I felt all these emotions. And so, you know, sadly, not everybody's family and friends or church will step forward and help somebody when they say that they have been abused. And oftentimes, I may be the first person who's actually heard that and has not reacted in a negative way and has invited them to let these emotions go and to keep looking to see if there are any additional ones related to this event. And that is, I mean, it can be hard holding tension with another person over just a basic emotion. But when to me, it's like a violation of trust. It's a violation of my body. It's just so many violations all there. And especially if the parents didn't do anything about it and could have,
Mm-hmm.
um, we're not going to go there today, but that's a bad thing. And so, here's a person, and I've had people break down and be completely in tears as they're telling me what happened all those years ago. And they're surprised that I knew how old they were when they had that feeling. And I know it's not me. I know it's the Holy Spirit guiding me. I get that. And the subconscious, because they're working together. But it's so powerful to hold those emotions with someone else, and just to you know I know you felt this, and I am so sorry that that happened, but would you like me to release it so we don't have to deal with this anymore? And those are the ones that usually the icky feelings come out. And especially the throat thing, I mean, that's been huge. Or I'll feel something like in the pit of my stomach, like when you hear your name over the intercom when you're in school and you got to go to the principal's office, and you're like, oh no, what did I do? So it's that big pit that's there, and it's not fun in any way, shape, or form. But to know that I'm not, I'm not necessarily, I do life coaching, but I'm not a coach at that point. I'm an emotion code practitioner. I'm helping them release these emotions so they can move forward in their life, either with a coach like you, or a nutritionist, or whatever they're working with. And to me, that's more important,
Mm-hmm.
is that they're able to do that. So I want to be there when they're doing those things, because I'm not going to rush through them. And your body is so smart. It tells us when we're done. It says, okay, well, that was a really big one, and we've released enough. And sometimes you are like, no, I want to do more. And your body's like, no. And
Yeah.
some people, I had somebody the other day say, I think we've released enough. And the body said, one more. And I thought, oh, okay, well, we're going to go with the subconscious because it knows. And after that, it said no more. But she said that actually completed what we were working on,
Mm-hmm.
which was a real heavy topic for her. And it was nice to know that, she was able to finish those at one time, because she said she would have stopped, but she's really glad she didn't. And so to be able to be with people and walk on this journey and walk with you on this journey, not, here, I'm going to do all these things and you're just going to sit there. No, we're going to work through these together and get rid of them, because you've had them way too long. If they are trapped in you, you have had them way too long.
Have the majority of your clients faced some kind of abuse?
I don't know that I would say abuse. I would say potentially like a traumatic situation, which could be abuse. It could be a divorce. It could be a grief situation. But pretty much everyone has had something huge in their life. And in some cases, like I said, I type up the notes and send them to you, and they may share with their family. And I had one person email me back and say they asked mom about their great great grandmother, and turns out that she had actually been abused, and no one had ever known that, and she would not have known that had she not asked. We've had, especially with guilt, as you start counting back the generations, and we use roughly 28 years per generation. And so with that, we went back, and hers was like, say, the 1600s, and that was when her family was coming over from Europe. And there was a whole lot of guilt going on. The family was trying to decide who to bring, and sadly who to leave. And probably the worst thing was, in that family, someone died on the voyage. So then the family felt guilty for bringing that person, and and not another person in their place. And so, I mean, that just perpetuated for a number of years. I mean, and guilt and grief are really hard. I mean, it's hard enough if you lose someone now. I mean, especially in COVID times, but to have had additional grief on you is trippy. And so some people may ask, if, can I have multiple of the same emotion? Absolutely. You can have that, any emotion every year, potentially. You can also have it inherited. You can have it on your own. You can have it absorbed. And so, depending on what's going on, you may say, oh, well, I just let worry go. Well, you did at age 20, but you've got worry in a lot of different ages. So
Mhm. So out of all the clients that you've worked with, um, what's one that has had an experience after working with you that you just never expected?
um, I had a woman. Um, we had been working on a lot of issues surrounding a divorce. And one of the weirdest emotions came up was shock. And when I gave her the date, it put her at a fairly young age, like early 20s. And she was like, well, wait a minute now. I don't think I had anything shocking then. And so anyway, she thought about it. We kept moving, and she was still thinking. And then finally she said, you know what? My sister had ended up at a with a in with a boyfriend who was doing like cult stuff, and we had gone to rescue her, and all I remember is being shocked at everything that was going on. Could that be it? And so we asked, and the subconscious said yes. And she's like, oh my gosh, I haven't thought of that in 30 plus years. Yeah, that's a big one to do. But here she's got all these other things, like with her parents, or with her ex-spouse, and then all of a sudden here is her sister out of the blue. But that was one of those days that we just shook the backpack to reveal the baggage, and that's what the subconscious and the Holy Spirit said, you got to work on this. So that was probably the most profound, because that was one that she said she felt really dizzy, like vertigo kind of dizzy, when we released that one. And it was just, she couldn't imagine that something that had happened that long ago into another person would impact her life in such a way. And the other thing we haven't talked about is, as we release emotions at the end of the session, we check to see how long it's going to take your body to process them. So when the body says no, how long is no? Some people can do it again in a couple hours, but most people need a couple days. So 1 to 5 days, and we figure that out. And during that time, you just, you try and take it easy on yourself, and definitely hydrate. But she said that when she totally felt that night that there was just a huge hole in her from that particular, or that specific emotion. And it was just like, wow. And then the only other one I can think of that was kind of an aha that wasn't intended to be an aha was a woman who had been divorced for 2 months, had a 8-year-old son who had autism. And the day the divorce was finalized and the dad came and got all the rest of his stuff, the son quit talking. And I was working with her on emotions from the marriage, and all of a sudden here we are scheduling a time for the next session, and her son comes through. Now, if you know anything about children with autism, they kind of do the tunnel vision thing. They know other people are there, but they really don't know other people are there. So he walked over, got in front of the computer, and looked at me and waved. And I was like, yes, because I've, as a special ed teacher, I've always had kids come up to me, and it's not been too surprising. But he walked off, and then the mom broke down in tears and said, "My son has not talked in 2 months." And I thought, oh my gosh, wow. She said, "Can you work on kids?" And I said, "Well, funny enough, I can work on kids, pets, and adults." And she said, "Can we work on my son now?" And I said, "Sure." So when the child's under 18, the mom or dad give permission. We worked with this little boy. He had three emotions. He had betrayal, he had abandonment, and he had anger. And they were all directed to his dad. And so he had quit talking. And so we released those, and the mom said, "Okay, well, I'll let you know what's going on." She texted me later that night and said, "He just laughed." And I thought, oh, can you imagine 2 months of your life not laughing as a kid? And so I didn't think anything about it. Saturday morning, I get a text about 10 o'clock that said she got up, made breakfast. He came in, was eating, and the next thing you know, he's talking up a storm. And she's like, "He's not shut up." And she said, "And that's a good thing." And so that little boy had been carrying around for 2 months those three emotions, and now he's bouncing off the walls and is his normal self again. And so she took the information and shared it with her ex, and he said he was really sorry that that they'd had that. So the little boy's been able to have visits with him and not not have any behaviors around that. And so it's improved their relationship. And to me, that as a special ed teacher, former special ed teacher, that just softens my heart, because I mean, children with autism or anyone with autism often have times being emotional and sharing their feelings. And so it immediately went bottled up, and he stopped talking. And it was such a profound issue for him, but to give him his voice back to me was really cool.
As a mom of a child with autism, I know where you're coming from. I remember when he was little, all we wanted to have him to do was talk, and now he won't stop talking. But when he was diagnosed, the doctor pulled me aside from my husband and said, "You need to understand, because you have a child with disabilities, you have an even higher chance of getting a divorce,
Hmm.
because it's going to require a lot of work, and one or both of you are going to get burned out and tired, and you're going to take it out on each other." So it was a very interesting perspective when you talk about that. You do not change an autistic child's routine unless you have to. And for us, it was my husband coming home because of COVID,
Hmm.
and he was trying to change the routine, and it was a really, really bad thing. We're gonna have to talk about maybe getting my son to see some of the emotions he's got, because the autistic children don't know how to express themselves well. He lives in his own little world. And sometimes I can be having a conversation with somebody, and I'll say the word no, and he thinks I'm talking to him. And it's like, I'm not even talking to you. Breathe.
Yeah.
Breathe.
Yeah.
So there is a book called The Emotion Code, and I've got the book, and I've looked through it, and I keep coming back to you because it's like, kind of overwhelming. That maybe that's just me, but how is it easier working with you instead of just doing this myself?
What I hear from people who try and do it themselves is that they have a vested interest in it, and they know what they're working on. So oftentimes they try and force answers that may or may not really be true. So, if you're trying to, if you say, "Okay, I have this frustration," and you're like, it's my ex," and you're like willing that to be the answer, and it may not. Where I am a neutral third party, and so I don't necessarily know all that's gone on in your life. All I'm doing is reading what your body says. Also, people sometimes don't get the testing methods down,
Hmm.
so they get false positives because they can't tell the difference between what's a yes and what's a no. So they'll test and they're like, I'll have people, I tried it, but I here's what I'm thinking. Like, you know what? I don't even want to know. Don't even tell me. Let's just start and do this, and then you can compare later and let me know what was different. But it's challenging, especially if it's emotional, because if you had been if it had been when we hit those ones from when you were 15, would you have continued on, or would you have been so baffled or upset, putting yourself back in that place, that you would have finished? Or would you have pushed on further even though your body told you to stop? And so those are some of the common ones. They
Hmm.
don't know when to stop, they don't get the right test, and they try and make the right answer or the answer fit for them. And so I don't.
I would have probably pushed for those earlier when we started working together because I knew that was there.
But they didn't
Like,
come out until significantly later.
right. And I would have pushed myself. I mean, there are times where you're like, you're done. I'm like, no, I'm not. Let's go. You're like, nope, you're done. And so I would have pushed myself um, to get out of it because I've lived with it for so long
Hmm.
that I want it out of my system. And the thing is, you think, oh, this is just for people who are in the pit. And it is. It is. Which is why the grief counseling you do goes so well with this because grief, nothing traps your emotions more than trauma.
Hmm.
Whether it is losing someone, abuse, sexual abuse, nothing traps emotions more than trauma. And it's why it goes together. But I have been actively working on my personal growth for 6 years.
Hmm.
I'm constantly doing a Bible study. I'm either reading a book or listening to a book, and sometimes both. And then there's before bed where I'm reading fiction because my brain says, you are done. You cannot do any more thinking. That's why I love fiction before bed on my Kindle. I've been doing the work. And the people who knew me beforehand to the people who beforehand and see how much I've grown, they're like, wow, it's big enough that they want to work with me for me to help them.
Hmm.
So this isn't just for somebody who is, in the pit. This is for somebody who is working actively.
Hmm.
I am a certified John Maxwell life and success coach.
Hmm.
And John puts us through our paces with the courses that we have and the calls that we have all the time. There's always something going on. But I was still stuck.
Hmm.
I was still stuck. And so what we've been doing is working through those emotions on why am I stuck in what I'm doing? Why is it that I don't feel worthy or I have imposter syndrome or prevents me from doing the work that I know I need to do? So we've had those discussions and we've worked through those emotions. So if you think, oh, this doesn't apply to me, it does because you've even worked on yourself some, haven't you?
I have worked on myself a lot. And actually, I do a test every morning to make sure I don't have any baggage backed up that needs to be released that would interfere with anybody else. So I have released a lot. Maybe it's one or two every day, but there have been chunks in my life where it's like, whoa. So yeah, and the things that I find the most intriguing is, yes, you can be having you can have counseling, you can have a therapist, you can have doctors, you can have coaches,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't know what you absorbed and they don't
Right.
know what you inherited. And they may also not know that you were molested or whatever trauma happened, right? Because you may
Right.
not have shared that with them. And that's perfectly fine. The emotion code kind of, I want to say it, it steps on toes because it brings stuff up, not in a bad way to make you relive it, but
Mm-hmm.
that it brings it up so you can get rid of it. And so, even when you're working on yourself, you may be like, nah, I don't feel like doing that. I want to work on that today. There's always going to be something you've not worked on
Mm-hmm.
because it hurt. You think it'll hurt too much, or you don't want to get trapped, or something's holding you back. But in reality, when we are working on things that are holding you back, it was a lot of stuff from when you were really young.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really, and when you think I'm going to work on myself, typically it's around what's now.
Right.
and maybe a few important things in life, but that's not necessarily where that one thing that's holding you back. It often is way back, and sometimes, especially with money mindset and feeling worthy,
Hmm.
probably 99.9% of the time, that's inherited. So there, you can work on yourself all you want and still have blocks that you can't access because you don't know you have them.
Well, wouldn't you say it's kind of like layers?
It is like layers. And I had a funny discussion the other day. I was trying to tell this to someone, and I said, so basically, if you think of the movie Shrek, we're not talking like donkey wanting parfait, because parfaits are yummy, so you want those layers. It's more like Shrek saying onions or ogres are like onions, and those are like the smelly ones that make you cry. And so there's so many different layers that as you start pulling them off, it lets off a little odor. It makes you cry. And you have all those layers that you don't know what all got trapped in each one of those layers.
Hmm.
And so, and it's funny too, because some people will be like, well, how come we haven't worked on any of my stuff when I was younger? Well, what was the thing that bothered you the most that happened recently? That's going to be on the outer layer. And so, even though something may have happened, when you were like, I don't know, 8 to 10, it may show up now because maybe it's that feeling of unworthiness. Maybe it was you weren't picked to play on the dodgeball team. It was like, they're down to two and they picked the last kid, and then you're still standing there and you're on the other team. So you just walk over there. That's unworthy, and that'll stay with you. So we may relieve an emotion that's from such a long time ago, but it's still impacting you significantly today.
In the process of letting go of these emotions, you bring them to the forefront. It's like, okay, we're in this area and we're talking about this emotion.
Hmm.
Um, Usually in our sessions, we go with an age, a year,
Hmm.
and who it's related to, inherited, absorbed, whatever, who
Hmm.
it's related to.
Hmm.
Is it possible that because you have faced that emotion, you become more aware of answers to dealing with those emotions after sessions?
Absolutely, because you see how traumatic it was for you at that age, and you may feel that and we can even ask, did we have it? I think this morning I had someone who released one of the unworthies and had it at 4 different ages. And so, I can ask, because it's a frequent one. I mean, you're not necessarily going to have, horror or shock maybe that many times, unless you just had a really traumatic life. But, we can ask those. And then you also are more aware because that layer's not there. So you're a little more raw. So you're going to notice if somebody kind of pushes that button, which is kind of why someone who's in an abusive situation, we want to make sure they're in a safe place. Because just imagine you are, you're trying to get out of the house, and you are no longer, have that layer, and then you go home and that person says something really, really snarky, and you've got two choices. You can be really strong, or you can break down. And if you break down, you're going to get hurt, and if you stand up, you're going to get hurt. So we want to get you out of that situation for your own safety before we have you so raw, because otherwise you're numb. You've been numb to it, or you would have left sooner.
So when you remove these emotions, you've left a void inside of
Yes.
the person. How do you help fill that back up? Because you got to be careful, because if you don't fill it up with what you want it to be filled up, Satan's going to be throwing something in there.
Oh yeah, he's going to be like, "Oh, what are they doing?" Typically, I use love, compassion, and gratitude to fill that spot. Now, if it's something like worthy or worthless, I may add in worth, or that you're worthy, so that it helps fill in. And that's part of that processing time, because this ball of energy is going somewhere, and it takes up space. And so we've got to replace it with something. But love, compassion, and gratitude for almost everyone you can think of is going to feel a lot better than what was there.
Oh yeah. Definitely. So I have one more question for you. If I gave you a billboard and you could say whatever you want on it, what would you put on your billboard?
God is good all the time. All the time, God is good.
I love that. It reminded me of one more question. I always do this. Um, do you strictly work with people who are Christians, or are you willing to work with people who in all walks of life?
I I work with anyone that has trapped emotions. I tend to find that I do attract a number of Christians,
Mhm.
but sadly, grief and loss and trapped emotions do not discriminate. So anybody can have them.
Mhm.
And so, if, and when we start our sessions, I say we're going to have a moment of silence. That could be for that person to meditate, just be quiet. They could say a prayer, whatever they need to do. I am praying that the Holy Spirit will guide me through what needs to come out. So, I don't necessarily tell them that's what I'm doing. If they ask, I'll tell them. But it's because, I know that God has given me this gift and talent. And so I want to make sure I use it right. And I can't imagine he'd be like, yeah, don't work with this person. They're icky. So yeah, I work with anybody that has that situation of trapped emotions. Like I said, I can work with clients from other coaches who have hit a roadblock and need to release some stuff before they can move forward. I can work on children if they are having behaviors or changes, have been in traumas, have been foster, have been adopted, um, and some interesting pets.
Yeah, we did some work on my dog. How can the listeners reach you?
Well, right now they could find me on Facebook, and I have a page that is Parenting Struggles. It's also a group, but I'm in the process of expanding that because I know that there's more than just parents dealing with this.
Mhm.
So that would be one way. And currently there's a website, parentingstruggles.com. And it has a form you can fill out and get to me. And then when we get everything moved to the new name, I'll forward that link over to the new site. But parentingstruggles.com would probably be the best. And if you tag me in the post, then they can message me. Just know that we go to bed really early. I live on the East Coast, and so if you are trying to get me at like 9 o'clock, I'll be in bed. And I don't have Messenger on my phone for a reason. So, but yeah, and I take appointments usually most days, roughly 9 to 5, but depending on what time zone you're on or in, I can do something either earlier or later, or I could do something on a Saturday or possibly Sunday afternoon. And then there's the people who are just like, I know I've got stuff. I don't need to know. I just want it gone.
Mhm.
And so I do it when I have time and send them the list, and they are still getting the benefits even though they're not there.
That is so cool. Well, that's all we have for you guys today. Um, there is so much to this emotion code, and yeah, it's a little bit voodoo, a little bit crazy, but the release that I have had, and the changes that I have had, and the growth that I have had because of it has been worth every minute I've spent with Laura and doing the hard work and dealing with the emotions. And I wanted to share this with you because I know I'm not the only one. I know I'm not the only one, and I'm not going to say someone listening to this. No, we all have dealt with trauma in one way or another. And it's time to get the life that we deserve, the abundant life that we were promised. And one of the best ways to do that is to let go. And Laura can help you do that. Well, that's it. That's all I've got for you guys. I will talk to you soon. Have a blessed day. Bye.